So we have come to the third recording in this series on the question of parts and wholes. We began with philosophers and biologists, moved to physics and mathematics, and today we've come to humanities and social sciences. Among ourselves, we could, I suppose, say we've saved the best wine until last. So let me ask each of you to present yourself and tell where you come from. Would you like to begin?
I come from Yugoslavia. I work at present in the University of Belgrade. But just to say a few words about my life, I took part in Yugoslav Liberation War during the war, and then later I studied philosophy and spent some time in London working for my PhD. Then around '63 we started a journal Praxis, which expressed independent critical views, so I had some political difficulties in Yugoslavia. But at the moment I am in a research institute in University of Belgrade, and I also teach in the fall semester in the University of Pennsylvania in the United States.
Very good. Joseph?
True to my naive nature, I would put it this way, that I'm a small-town boy from upper Wisconsin who discovered culture and education in Chicago and on the continent of Europe. And I'm presently from Chicago, where I'm the director of an Institute for Musicological Research, and I'm also the music editor for Gordon and Bridge Science Publishers, which is headquartered in New York, London, and Paris. I studied not only in the United States, but also studied at the University of Freiburg in Germany, where I finished my doctoral studies with Willibald Gurlitt, the editor of the Archiv für Musikwissenschaft, and also studied phenomenology with Eugen Fink, who was an assistant of Edmund Husserl. And I find myself over here in Sweden because one day at the end of January I got this beautiful letter about parts and wholes, and I looked at it. That's very interesting, I thought. When I came to the last page, and they said they were going to cover my travel expenses, I thought, that's a very good idea. And so I'm trying to be part of this whole right now as a human being, and also to try to see how between music and philosophy we can also find some common ground among each other in the various sciences, the various arts, and so forth. I think that's pretty much about what I would have to say.
It's an enormously valuable contribution. And Joseph?
I'm Israeli. I teach part in Israel, part now in Canada. I used to teach for a long time in the United States. Like Mihailo, I studied in London, in the London School of Economics, and also taught there. And that about covers my career. Perhaps I should say my teacher was Sir Karl Popper, who is somewhat known philosopher and social philosopher. I feel a bit uneasy that you said, introduced us as what the social sciences and humanities. We are two philosophers and a musicologist who is also a musician. So I feel that the social sciences are a bit represented by you. You are a geographer. So I think now you introduce yourself as a geographer and join the team. Otherwise we have some imbalance.
I think we're all very hybrid in our backgrounds and very ecumenical in our interests. Yes. And it's interesting that we've all lived in several places. I think that matters a great deal for the search for common denominators. So I am a geographer, but everybody knows why I'm on this series, so I don't need to introduce myself. Let's first try to define what is the issue. Do we all perceive the issue of parts and wholes in the same way, or are there...
I would like to start, if I may, politically. Being Israeli, I am very concerned with the national problem. Ever since I was a child, I remember we had discussions about South Africa, and I never understood why, because South Africa is remote from Israel or Palestine and never had connections. And of course, now it becomes clearer and clearer to me there is a discrimination in my country not on the basis of skin color, because in my country skin color is the whole rainbow, but on the basis of religion. And the result is very paradoxical, I should mention it in a sentence if I may, and it is that because there is no nation of Israel, there is a very strong nationalistic, chauvinistic mood. And speaking of parts and wholes, I discussed in the symposium here my conviction that we are parts of wholes, and we cannot be understood as individuals without reference to our backgrounds, but the idea of responsibility must remain with the individual. They say, I am, in my general philosophical convictions, a holist, but in my moral conviction, I am violently anti-holist, strongly individualist, of the most old-fashioned. Thank you.
That's very clear. Yes, we all come from societies that experience similar divisions.
Absolutely. When I was 17, 18, that's just before the war, I saw so much poverty and so much oppression around me that I thought what is needed is a global change, not just small modifications here and there in one part or the other part. And that's why then I committed myself to this liberation struggle. And later, as a scholar in all those years, I always had an interest in finding what is the deeper, broader meaning of those particular problems which I studied. So I had an understanding, of course, for the study of particulars, study of parts, because you cannot do it otherwise in science, in social science also. But I could never be satisfied with just knowing all the details of one particular problem without seeing the whole. And that's why in philosophy, in social science, I always was interested in starting from a global context, then studying a particular, then returning to the whole. And in this moment, I think we are in a very deep crisis, a whole world, not only Europe, but third world even much more, even the most advanced industrial countries, United States, for example. And it seems to me that one of the reasons why we are in such a mess is that for a very long time, for centuries, we relied on a paradigm of development where we reduced our conception of life to material growth, to a purely quantitative growth, exponential growth, and on the other hand, in our social life, we on the one hand, we split society into two parts. In politics, we allowed a state to grow and develop enormous bureaucratic apparatuses which control our lives more or less. On the other hand, in civil life, we led an atomistic life. Everybody was interested only in his own thing, more or less. And so if we are in difficulty of that proportion like now, there must be something wrong in our thinking. And I think what is wrong in our thinking is that we just go from one extreme to the other. It's either atomism, reductionism, emphasis of the part, or on the other hand, we let the whole be dominated by some strange mystical totalities, states or the leaders of the parties, ideologies. And we have to find a way out of it. I think a third alternative must be there, which takes into account both wholes and parts, and know how to, on the one hand, transcend an atomistic, narrow point of view, but on the other hand, never allow any power, any social power, to dominate in the name of a holy whole, of a totality.
Before we get into the solutions, I'd like to wander a little more on the definition of the issue. And already what we've heard from both of you is that you start from experience. You don't separate social thought from lived experience. Now, it's very different from what we've had so far. The whole has been a head thing for most of the others. How do you respond to
Well,
that?
I think that we're caught up in experience naturally, And even though we go on these cerebral adventures, that we're still forced back into experience. For instance, in my own, if I can be biographical again without being too offensive, living in a city like Chicago, which now is really an international city, just in our section of town, the northwest section of town, one of the concerns has on its window, "We speak the following languages." About 9 languages are put down there. One of them is Israeli, Hebrew. One of them is Hebrew, modern Hebrew. And there's Russian, Indian languages, German, French, everything. So that we feel that we live in an international city now in Chicago. And we also have just succeeded, I say we have just succeeded in electing a black mayor. We feel that he is a progressive person and one who will bring about some changes on the regional scene in a city as important as Chicago is in the United States, as over against what we had to put up with before, a good deal of bureaucracy. One of the mayors that we had before, who will remain unmentioned because de mortuis nihil nisi bonum,
Requiescat in pace.
yes, we feel...
You mention him daily anyway.
I mention him daily anyway, yes, that's true. We often said that through the best of intentions, despite the best of intentions, that his brain was merely the end of his spinal cord and nothing more. And I was talking with Dr. Dunker and a couple of other people who are experts in anatomy and so forth, and with a medical doctor. This morning I was walking around about 5:30 around town because I couldn't sleep anymore. I was carrying my copy of Steppenwolf, which I'm finally reading in German. No, I read it in English 10 years ago. And he was telling me that there's a book written by a medical doctor in the United States concerning the brain and so forth, and that the bulbous part of the end of our spinal cord goes way back to the dinosaurs, and that this particular doctor says that the only part of the human brain that the bureaucrat makes use of is this bulbous end of the spinal cord, whereas the ordinary human being makes use of the rest of the brain, particularly the cortex and so forth. And I found this very amusing, to say the least, as a layman.
You don't know. One thing we all know, and that is that it's not good tactics to underestimate the power of the enemy.
Oh, I don't underestimate the power. I think that Kafka did not underestimate the power of the bureaucrat at his time either. No, I certainly don't. And also, I would not want to stereotype everybody that is in some sort of a bureaucratic position. They're all not that way. It's easy to make generalities and stereotypes, but at least there is some humor in the situation.
Yeah, but Joe, you can tell us about the organ in Freiburg. If you studied in Freiburg,
the pipe organ in Freiburg is a multiple instrument. I think that there are 4 distinct organs, perhaps 5. It's been some time since I've been back to Freiburg. E. Power Biggs, who is an American organist, has put out a special disc playing Bach, especially on the Freiburg organ.
Right.
And it's a magnificent instrument. I've played it myself. I knew Dr. Winter, who was the Dom organist, the Münster organist at the time. And it's a magnificent, beautifully voiced instrument.
The whole replaces the whole orchestra.
You see,
well, here, yes, it does.
It's more than that. It's more than that. When you sit in a cathedral, you bathe in sound as not in a concert hall. When you say the sound really engulfs you, it's enormous. What the organ can do, no other combination of instruments can do. It really is enormous.
Yeah, a cosmic feeling.
Yes, quite. So it comes from all directions. It is meant to overwhelm you. Of course, there are some bad organs where the bass takes over and you don't hear the soprano, not to mention the tenor.
Music for the organ also.
Oh yes. But the organ is really, in this respect, very well integrated into the ritual and into the building,
Yes, it is. Yeah.
into the experience.
At least
you see
in
the
this
word experience, if I may. Oh,
Yes.
in this tradition, at any rate, whereas in the temple tradition,
Yes.
until a certain time, it was only choral.
yes.
And I spent over a year in Bucharest, where I was lecturing on musicology, mostly medieval music. And there, I used to drop into the Romanian Orthodox Church sometimes on Sunday just to catch the choir,
It's beautiful.
a
Beautiful choir.
cappella choir singing, you see. So there's no organ in those churches
No,
either,
no.
as there
Yeah,
isn't in the
choir.
temple ordinarily, except in the Reformed temple in America they do have pipe organ and so forth. A friend of mine directs a choir and plays organ in one of the Highland Park temple in Chicago. And
So you're suggesting, Joe, that the experience of music in a particular setting
Some.
can give you a sense of the whole.
Yes, you see, you spoke of us referring to our experiences. Experiences are multifarious, and when one speaks of empirical experience in laboratory, in a manner which is very traditional, but which I, as a philosopher, do not accept, they segment it. They take it slice by slice. And it has its use. I don't wish to completely undermine it, but even there, we have learned recently that the experience only signifies because we have some questions, some theories, we address questions to nature, so we just integrate the slices. It's a great art to find a way to get from nature a thin slice and have it blow up into a whole system. That's why scientific experience is very special. And when you speak about personal experience, usually it is really of a whole, and that's why the experience really of church music and organ music in particular, because Joe is right, choir music has a different color, quality to it. And when one think of these great masses, whether it's the Lomame or any other similar things, there were about 10, 20 people sitting up in the gallery and singing. You could hardly hear them. It's a different thing. Not that it wasn't marvelous, but it was different. But so we even scientifically, empirically can feel that there are immersing experiences and distant experiences. We can't even explain experience without some sense of the whole. But of course our conference was more analytic, and the question is, does the whole constitute the sum of its parts? They say if you take even a total experience like the one sitting in a cathedral, praying in a mass and listening to music, can you say what the ingredients are as a psychophysicist and put them together and say, now this is the experience? And the answer is no. There is more to it. There are the interactions of the parts. So you ask the question, if we have all the parts of the experience and the interaction, do we get the whole experience? On this there is a debate. For instance, a leading, very famous philosopher called Ludwig Wittgenstein, perhaps one of the most famous philosophers of the century, wrote a book in which he insisted that the whole is the sum of its parts plus the interactions of the sums. And
what did Bertrand Russell have to say about
Oh,
that? In
he
fact, I
said
was
that
going
this
to
is-
ask you that today. I may as well ask you right now.
Bertrand Russell said that this is logically false, and he refuted it. He said very simply that if you have the whole experience, then this is a statement which is a matter of fact, and it's not a part of the experience, but the whole experience. And therefore, logically, Wittgenstein was mistaken. There's no doubt that Russell was right.
Sometimes we speak as if there is just one whole and on the other side parts, but each whole then is a part of a larger whole, of course. And we have needs for all those, beginning in music. If you speak about music, you have a need for a lead where you have a very intimate personal feeling expressed. And then also you have a need for a quartet, a quintet, for a symphony, and then for church music, where you have everything, which is really an embracing whole. You have voices, choir, orchestra, sometimes several choirs, like in Bach. And here is a tendency toward ever more embracing wholes. And on the other hand, there is also a need to then receive one small part of it, which is again a whole. In music, everything is already a totality, a whole, which can be analyzed into its element, and there is no end to it in either direction, either micro direction or macro.
No, there
direction.
isn't. I think that we always begin with a part and we build toward a whole, but then we discovered, as he said, that this whole is also a part from which we have to begin to. So I'm going to go further and proceed as I was before, that being a church musician is only one hat that I wear, do you see? But this particular church that I'm in right now, we have two choirs and a brass quintet and a guitar group, and of course I'm supposed to direct the whole thing. And we, however, feel ourselves to be part of the neighborhood. And in Chicago, the neighborhood is a very important concept going way back to the beginning of the city. Chicago is like the United States composed of various sub-states. In other words, the city is the central government, and the neighborhoods are the states. This is both good and bad. You'll have original neighborhoods that were all Irish, original neighborhoods that were all Polish, all German, all Jewish, etc., etc. Of course, this is already wrong when I say Jewish, because Jewish is a culture and a religion. It's not a race.
But all these
But you
units
get the
are
idea of what I mean. They're ethnic
Certainly.
at any rate.
When you say Irish also, you mean Americans with ethnic Irish
Yes,
background.
definitely.
Certainly.
But all these people now, in the campaign of Mayor Harold Washington, we got together. It was not only the blacks who elected Washington, but also the Hispanics, and in each ward in the city, a minority in each ward. But cumulatively, the white vote put Washington over and elected him. Even with all the black vote, 96% of the black vote and most of the Hispanic vote, he still would not have won if he had not also gotten from each ward a so-called minority of the white vote. And we put him over, we feel, and he recognizes us, and that's why he's going to make use of us. And so that my music will not only be music for the church, but also for the neighborhoods. I may be part of a citywide revival of the Arts Council for the neighborhoods of Chicago. And I'm looking forward to working in this broader whole, do you see?
Yes.
So
I think that's a very interesting connection, and I don't want us to lose it, because when we spoke of the experience of the whole, in music, in worship, and so forth, we spoke of individuals' whole experience. And I was about to ask, can we move that to the group level, to some collective
no
level?
No man is an island.
But you said that you were an individualist, you see,
I,
as far as that went.
First of all,
but he also said in his paper that both individualism and collectivism are passé.
Yes, certainly.
So
certainly, but let me say just on the more abstract, remote level, there is in the 20th century a detailed and prolonged study of systems, whether cybernetics, information theory, or systems theory, or general systems theory, and whether in physics or in sociology or in politics, one speaks of subsystems. And a subsystem is a part which is fairly integrated, fairly stable. It can be a part that possesses a certain connected space-time region, but it need not be. You can think of the computer system in your city, which has a branch in every bank and so on, but it has a general memory centralized in the service of the other users of the computer. And the computer system must be fairly stable. It's fed electric current, but the electric current is regulated and so forth. So once you can cut out from the world artificially a part of it and say, the interaction of this part with the rest of the world is not that strong. Of course, without the interaction, it's pointless. We use the computer, so it must interact with us, must give us answers to our questions. But on the whole, it is stable enough to enable us to study it while forgetting the interactions. The same goes for the solar system. The same goes for Niels Bohr's atom. Once we thought of the atom as utterly unable to interact with the universe and therefore stable to the extreme. Niels Bohr said, no, it's like a solar system. But again, the electron, although it can get out of the atom, usually stays there. So we can look at the atom as more or less a somewhat flexible but given system, or the nucleus. So there are degrees of detachedness and connectedness. And when we decide that something is sufficiently interconnected and stable that we can study it ignoring the rest of the world, then we call it a subsystem or a system. And really there is no difference between them, because as Mihailo said, every system is a subsystem of another system. And yet the fact that we can look at parts is a remarkable fact. You don't need to be a doctor or a biologist to know that a human body is a whole. You cut out of the human body any member and it's dead, or dead within a very short time. Now
Or
we can
least,
sew it
at
back.
least maimed or crippled.
Quite.
Yeah.
And yet the fact is that we can study an organ fairly in isolation. And of course there's the blood supply that keeps it going as it is. There is the function of that organ. The organ interacts with the body, otherwise the organ would be useless to the body, like the appendix. So it's not isolated, but we can study it in isolation as approximate. Our study will not be true, therefore, because we assume it to be isolated when we know it not to be the case. This idea we owe to Einstein, and this is why I think Einstein was the greatest philosopher of the 20th century. This is why I think the influence of Einstein is not only in physics. In physics he exemplified his philosophy. And his philosophy is highly skeptical, highly scientific in the sense of remote. When I tell people, especially my students, that Einstein never believed Einstein's theories, they get surprised. Why did he advocate them? There is a marvelous story in an obituary on Einstein in a popular newspaper in England. It was in New Statesman and Nation. It was personal reminiscences of Einstein. And the fellow tells that last time he saw Einstein, Einstein was walking with him in his garden. Einstein was a great active person, and telling him that he was busy now. He had an idea, he worked on it a few months, it's no good, and now he's writing it up. So the friend, being a man of letters, not a scientist, was surprised, said, if it's no good, why are you going to write it up? And Einstein said, and I quote it verbatim because it impressed me so much and helped me personally, he said, so that another idiot won't waste time on it. Just this idea, once you get it, once you get a certain, you break yourself up into two people, actually. You get crazy. You can look at yourself from the outside and say, look at this little idiot. If Einstein can call Einstein idiot, you can call yourself idiot too. That's wonderful. And
You see, there is this deep contradiction in all of us. On the one hand, we want to be as free as possible. We have our aspirations. We would like to avoid the obstacles which prevent us. We have a certain potential, some gifts we want to bring them to life. But on the other hand, we become human only in society. We learn language, we learn how to think, we learn how to do things creatively. And we have also a very deep need to belong to a community, to share with other people. We care about others. And at each level you have the same problem. Look at the local community or a collective of people who work together in a university. On the one hand, they want to preserve as much autonomy as they wish. On the other hand, they know that they cannot survive without collaborating with others. And so you see, we have here the great problem of preserving as much autonomy as possible on the one hand, but on the other hand, to have this necessary level of integration and of some kind of rational coordination, because society cannot survive elsewhere. And the greatest dangers come when, on the one hand, a society wants to abolish this autonomy, this freedom of individuals or autonomy of small communities, when everything becomes a melting pot and when someone from the center decides about everything. On the other hand, also there is a danger for us as a society, as human beings, that individuals will stop caring about the public good at all. When there is a deep crisis in the society, that's what happens, a total disintegration.
They retreat into themselves,
Total
into their
retreat,
own narrow little work,
privatization,
privatization.
concern
yes,
with very small, petty, selfish
gentlemen,
concerns.
I really cannot be part to this contempt for this common man. No, I'm sorry.
It's
I
not
will
common
It's
man.
not the
Common man-
contempt for the common
Look,
man, it's
common
just the
man
opposite.
has
I
a
don't
need
agree.
to belong. Common man is not a selfish, self-centered individual who cares only about his own thing. Look at any common man, how much people care about members of family, about friends, about neighbors. That's what you find in common men. Only some eggheads become totally isolated.
I have to just say one thing. I'm looking for something in Steppenwolf that says exactly what Mihailo is just saying. That's why I'm looking at this book. So, go
and
ahead.
then I'll express my own
just
position.
go ahead.
No, you read
Please.
and then I'll express
No, I'm
mine.
still looking for the quotation.
Then
It's a beautiful one.
let me say, then Joe mentioned the word privatization. And there has been quite a study of the behavior of individuals who are, what did you say, self-centered. They prefer to spend the weekend puttering around the house, building another room, or cleaning their cars. And the writers who studied these were concerned with the interest of the common man, and they went to study people and see what their needs and problems were. And they found out that they needed another room and to clean the car, and that's what they were doing. And they were very angry, and they had expressed a disappointment in the pettiness of the small man. Privatization. I don't know, if someone feels the need to belong, we can see what can be done about it. And if he feels the need to stay home and clean the car, that's all
But
right.
Joe,
Nothing
we can't
It's not
retreat.
a problem.
We can't retreat into the bedroom, pull down the shades, get under the covers, and go to sleep for a year. Like Rip Van Winkle, we can't do that.
Yeah,
you see,
everybody
and
has
still
a
have
need
a
for
society.
privacy, you know, that's not a problem. A mature person must have some privacy, must be alone, must read alone. But this privacy, the need for privacy goes together with the need to belong.
Mihailo,
Also,
you know,
both things go together.
Mihailo, you know too much about the needs of a simple person. I don't. And I think we should leave these things open.
But I think there is a somewhat of a misunderstanding, speaking past each other there, because if I understood Mihailo correctly, he's making this case that we need some definition of sociality, a formula for social life which respects the integrity of individuals, and yet the autonomy and the integrity, authenticity, and still build a wider community of concern which will allow
You're
us
right,
to
and this I object to most strongly, because he bases this on his idea of the needs of people. And I think respecting people is not dependent on what we think they need. This, I think, is a fundamental of democracy that we all too often forget, and therefore with really good democratic intentions, we end up tyrannizing. So I don't know if we have cross purposes or a disagreement.
Yes.
May I be allowed to quote just very briefly from Steppenwolf? Would that be
Briefly,
appropriate?
If
Briefly?
it elucidates our impasse here. Yes.
It's an inimitable passage. May I read it in German? We can discuss it in English, or
You don't have the English version.
I don't have the English version with me.
And give a very short piece.
Very
Translate.
short. All right, fine. He says here, for instance, der Steppenwolf stand, seiner eigenen Auffassung zufolge, gänzlich außerhalb der bürgerlichen Welt, da weder Familienleben noch sozialen Ehrgeiz kannte. Fühlte sich durchaus als Einzelnen, als Sonderling, bald und krankhaften Einsiedler, bald auch als übernormal, als ein geniemäßig veranlassigtes, über die kleinen Normen des durchschnittlichen Lebens erhabenes Individuum, ein erhabenes Individuum that stands above all of society, and he's suffering terribly from it, though.
Yeah,
you
you got
see?
a good quotation which expresses very well the tenor of this contemptible book.
You find this contemptible?
Yes, certainly.
I find it delightful.
Well, we disagree, you see.
Please
I think we
elaborate
have-
why you find it.
Because in this book, Hermann Hesse expresses admiration for a certain type of person through the means of expressing contempt for others.
Well, he does say that
Even in the
himself.
sentence you quoted.
He admits it himself. He says here, for instance, mit Bewusstsein verachtete den Bourgeois
Here you are.
und war stolz darauf, keiner zu sein. Dennoch lebte in mancher Hinsicht ganz und gar bürgerlich selber.
I have only one answer to this, and it is nihil humanum mihi.
Alienum
Est. Here you are.
So here's
That's
a
the
man
little
that's
Latin
torn.
I know.
Here's a man that's torn between the fact that he wants to be a strong individual,
What
and he
is
even
a strong what kind of talk is
and at
that?
the same time he so badly needs the society in its present state.
that's
However much he criticizes and despises it, nevertheless he has to and even wants to live in it. So
I'll start from the children. A child becomes a human being only if there is a community that cares a lot about the child. See, if there is not that communal care, the child becomes a little wolf, a beast. You don't even ever learn language. And so you see, this is how it begins all. If there is not that love and care and sympathy of the little community where we belong as children, we know what happens. You have an individual who becomes very unsure, very neurotic, and very often these are the individuals who become criminals.
and of course they might also found Rome because Romulus and Remus were nursed by a wolf.
No.
And they ended up founding Rome.
No,
I'm
no,
being
no, the fact-
both
Now we
facetious
know-
and serious
now
at the
we
same
know there are
time.
children who survive owing to animals, and when you find such children in India, there were several cases. They can never learn to speak anymore.
Yeah, may I say,
Never.
Mihailo, this is the kind of discussion which I think passé.
It's
And-
eternal
Well,
problem.
yes, of course. You see, classical individualist philosophy handled this question by saying this individual is human, only human in a very early stage, and if you take such individuals and give them a desert island and a few thousand years, then they will develop and be as smart as you and I because they have the same constitution. Whereas it was the collectivist philosophy which says a human individual is like a cell in a human body. You cut them off, they are dead as humans, although they may be alive as animals. And so it's the collective that gives the individual his individuality and therefore his legal rights, so that when he is outside human society, he is really not human. And for instance, you can kill him. I find all the discussion not to the point. We have to assume the existence of the individual and the existence of society. And there's no doubt that we have to respect both individuals and societies. And classical individualism, in my opinion, is passé because it did not recognize societies and their right to exist, except as collections of individuals. And I think that the rights of nations, of national self-determination, for example, which is a 20th century idea. It's Woodrow Wilson and Lenin, although I think the term is Lenin's. I have never found who was the first to use the terminus technicus, right for national self-determination. But certainly we need both individual and social or national or political self-determination. So in a sense there is no disagreement between Mihailo and myself in the sense that we both recognize the contribution of the whole to the part and the part to the whole. The question of priority is a classical question. The individualist says the priority is in the individual, and the collectivist says the priority in the collective, and they place responsibility there. This is why collectivism is a dangerous philosophy, because it puts responsibility in the nation, that is, in the national leader, because really people, only individuals can have responsibility.
Yes,
Nations
but then
just
if you
don't.
have
But
a
we
true
agree that you said first that both individualism and collectivism are passé, and I say the same, because my position is not collectivist. You know, I made it very clear that I'm also against the collectivism where someone speaks in the name of collective and imposes things. I emphasize very strongly importance of individuals and communities' autonomy, freedom, and so on. Scientific question here is, of course, what does it mean to have that genetic makeup, what kind of genetic biological disposition we have, what this is. Is individual born with a number of qualities which will develop anyway, whether on a deserted island or in society? Or what these genetic dispositions are? Just dispositions. That means that this is something which is different in each individual case, but only under appropriate conditions will become reality. And these conditions are existence of some kind of community.
Yes. You see, since you said I had to play the social scientist here, let me be devil's advocate now.
Good morning.
You philosophers move very quickly into a kind of ism language.
Yes.
Even though you began speaking about practical things like violence on the streets or
Yes.
misunderstanding among nations, and then
Yes.
suddenly we're into a grand discourse on human nature, atomism, collectivism, and all these
Yes.
things,
Yes.
and even the solution of the systems and the subsystems.
Yes.
Now, that is really not terribly helpful, because we start repeating it, like we started repeating
Yes,
the
I
physics
know.
models in our research. It doesn't help us with that question of how do you move from the individual to this organicity of social life that has the capacity to grow. Okay?
Well, I still think
And
that the
that's where
human
youth is.
body is an excellent model of how parts become a whole
In society.
in society. I don't think that some merely abstract or metaphysical model is as much help as simply experiencing my own body
I
as a body, and also as being part of everyone who is sitting here right now,
Joe,
as a little mini society that we have created.
I cannot disagree more. I really think Anne's challenge is superb, and we really don't have time, and I can't answer it. Let me brag a little bit and do some self-advertisement. I've written a whole book on just this question about how isms can help science develop its theories. Because I'm a philosopher of science, and I'm interested in the social sciences and in the isms that have built social science in the past, and in the isms that stand at the service of social scientists today. It is really a huge and complex field. We discussed it a little bit in the conference. I mentioned that classical individualism, which I think has run its course, has its greatest success in the social and political and economic philosophy of David Hume and Adam Smith and Jeremy Bentham. And certainly it is individualistic. I would also include Karl Marx in the individualistic tradition. And I think it is a superb tradition. It helped us develop our ideas such as they are. But it's now just unable to help us cope with the world in which nation building, rich and poor nations and so forth are on the agenda. And collectivism stepped in order to explain the phenomenon of the growth of nations and so forth, which the collectivists rightly said individualists overlooked. Unfortunately, collectivism is a very poor philosophy, and it contributed less to the growth of understanding than individualism, but it did expose the weaknesses of classical individualism. Let me just say, if I may, the point that Joe raised again, why I think only individual human beings can be responsible. It is simply, there is no place to place responsibility on a nation. Whenever you speak of the responsibility of a nation and you ask yourself what it is, you immediately reduce it to the responsibility of the either leaders or members of the nation. When you punish a nation, then you punish its individuals. My teacher, Karl Popper, who is a classical individualist of the school that I am not, or to an extent more than I, he wrote his book, The Open Society, during the war. And he asked the question, if we win the war over Germany, can we punish Germany without punishing the Germans? And he tried a model of doing this, which it is very sad that nobody pays attention to, because the idea is so wonderful. Try to punish Germany without punish the nation. There is the famous Talmudic saying, there is the Psalms saying, let sins end, and the Talmud says the sins, not the sinner, should come to an end. And that is a marvelous, humane attitude. But with all our goodwill, we can realize that responsibility always lies in individual. We can't simply put it in any collective. Even when we say the United Nations is responsible, immediately we have in mind certain individuals sitting there, either administering or voting or making decisions or whatever it is. We have no place for responsibility except individuals. And in general, what I suggested in my book is that individuals interact via societies, but societies interact via individuals. And this, I think, helps a lot in the social sciences. Just this maxim, if I may.
But then, Joe, the way that you are communicating with us right now is through language, which is not your private language, but is a communal language which you learned and which I learned
Yeah,
And
you're
this
right.
has roots going thousands of years
Right
back.
again. I
And
said
millions
individuals
of
communicate.
people
Sure.
worked on this, and to the point where we adopt their musculature when we pronounce the very words that they handed down
You're
to
right.
us. And this
You're
was
right.
not something that I invented when I was a baby,
You're right.
but it's something that I learned, that I was taught by
Quite.
my parents and my brothers and my friends. you see?
There is a danger in this view that only individuals are responsible. Namely, you see, an individual who was member of a country or a nation which did atrocities can always get away with responsibility by saying, I am not responsible, I did not decide these things, that was my Führer. No.
Quite.
But now, of course, to the extent to which you have a democratic arrangement in a country, the community as a whole is responsible if the community as a whole has taken the decision. To the extent to which you are free, to that extent you are responsible. So if the community took a decision democratically, the whole community is responsible. Now, when you don't have a democratic arrangement in a country, then again, you can say that this community as a whole is responsible to a lesser degree just because it accepted without doing anything, without rebelling against the atrocities, against tyranny, you know. So one is responsible as individual, but you can say that that whole communities may be responsible for what the whole community did.
Indeed,
Yes.
and yet
Yeah.
when you say the whole community is responsible, you mean every member of it. And when you say the whole community suffers, you mean more than every member, you mean something else. So there is a difference when you speak about responsibility than when you speak about language. The language is not just all of us speaking, but as you said, a whole tradition and institution.
Yes.
But responsibility
Of
is
which
all
we are a part,
of
of
which
that
we are
whole.
part. I agree.
See?
But when you say the whole community or the whole nation is responsible, you mean everyone, not the tradition.
No, you mean, for example, you have reparations. If people accept the war, which the government started, and if the country inflicted enormous damages to another people, attacking them, invading them, and so on, then what you have then at the end are war reparations, which is
Yes.
the damage which the whole community, the whole people have to pay.
Is there such a thing as collective guilt? I mean,
Cannot
let
be.
me, if it's
That is the
possible
question.
if it's possible to introduce a little humor at this
Yeah.
point, it's this typical question of blaming the individual or holding the individual as responsible.
Yeah.
It's like the old American joke about when the police raided the bordello, but they did not arrest the piano player because he said, all I'm doing is playing the piano. I didn't know what else was going on here, do you see?
Yes.
Or the Nazi in Berlin. He
Yeah.
said,
Eichmann
I worked in a
worked on the
subway. I
orders."
didn't know what was going on the surface, you see?
Or I had to. These were my orders. So I
These were
only
my orders.
Executed
yeah.
the orders.
I only executed my duty. I just was doing my duty, do you see?
But I guess Joe could say easily, we're finished. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
You have the last word. Lovely.
Thank you.